Got the recording started. This is the Open RFC meeting for the NPM CLI for April 13th, 2022. This is my first time doing it, so bear with me. We've got an agenda today, which I will share the link again here. So there's a bunch of items, but first I want to acknowledge our code of conduct, which applies to these discussions and anytime you interact with our repositories. So review that at your leisure. So our intended outcomes that we've got a list today. I took a chunk out of upcoming agenda. The second one is a doozy, so we'll see how much farther we get after that. Yeah, does anyone have any announcements or anything they want to amend to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll get right in. So command specific configuration. The motivation here. So there's a lot of configurations. Right now, all of our configuration is very global. Can anyone speak to this RFC specifically?
I mean, I can. This is something NPM has lacked since day one.
Yep.
And it was particularly painful in NPM 5, I believe, when the default changed for save, because we couldn't put in NPM RC a way to keep it on for install, but have it off for shrink wrap, for example, and vice versa. I forget the exact scenario that screwed us up, but it was a big pain in the butt. And was every time it was brought up, the response was the NPM config system is a mess, and it's really hard to make these kinds of changes. And the gist of the response was something like, I agree we need this, however, I can't see a path to getting it done. So if this RFC is a path to getting it done, amazing. I think we should move to a world where almost all config is command specific. The use cases for globally setting a config item should be minimal.
So the good news is that that's a huge priority for us right now. V9 is going to be a rework of the config. So
awesome.
And so this is something that we want to tackle. Luke, correct me if I'm saying anything incorrect here. But yeah, I think we're gonna take some time and refactor config, and command specific config is a big part of that. Is there anything you think we should add, Luke?
So I have not read the entire rendered RFC. We've had so many discussions about it internally. I wanted to double check if it said anything about what we would do in the case of now that it's command scoped, if you specified one incorrectly. And I don't think it does. I'm just skimming it now, but I didn't know if that was part of this RFC of like NPM 9 config stuff, or if that came up in a different RFC. But just to bring it up now, another change we'd like to make is not have unknown configs silently do nothing. Because we ran into the case, as an example today, of npm ls not taking omit where other commands did. And so npm ls omit dev just did the same thing as npm ls. So that's another, hopefully, part of this RFC is as we make command specific stuff, we can more easily error if you say, npm publish omit dev or something. We say that's not a valid flag. So I'm not sure if that's been brought up, or if that's part of this RFC or not, but I just wanted to surface that as well.
Yeah, let's make sure we add it, if not. Any other thoughts? Yeah, this is really important. I think I think V9 will be really exciting, just to get like a bunch of deprecation and breaking changes on the config. All right.
Sorry,
Let's-
does anyone have feedback on if npm threw an error for any invalid config instead of what it does now of silently keep going?
I think the problem with that is that npm configs can be used on multiple npm versions, including older ones. So throwing on invalid config is fine, unless I need that config for an older npm version to do the right thing. Yeah. So I think that we have to be very careful, even in a Semper Major, what we throw on there, and it sort of also, like, we like npm just for config can't really assume that people are always using only the current version of npm with the repo.
Yeah.
So like that's going to sort of constrain all future changes to the config system in some way.
Yeah, I think we could certainly throw warnings in V9, and maybe even as part of that show a deprecation that this will show an error in a future breaking change. Something, you know, cycle through it a few versions. That might be a good idea.
So it's the idea that, sorry, no, it's just clarifying. So it's the idea that you can have this config file, npmrc, and have command specific config, and it wouldn't error just by you running like install. It wouldn't error for like config you have for audit, because that might be something you actually only use in some other version of npm,
right.
But it would error if you run the specific command.
Oh, I was even saying stronger than that. So I like that anyway. Don't validate config that doesn't apply to the command I'm running. But separately, I might have, let's say this config comes out in V9. I might have some install specific config in V9, and then let's say V10 removes that. I might still need it there so it works on both V9 and V10. And if V10 threw on it, that would not be viable. So I'm saying it kind of can never throw, or we can never remove anything. Like potentially, that's a strong statement that maybe we wouldn't always want to hold to, but like I think that's the risk that strong statement would apply. And then the other thing I wanted to add is npm config also comes from environment variables, which are not always actionable to change. So like validating, and also npmrc can come from any of 4 locations, only 2 of which are controlled by the user, and only 1 of which is project specific. So like it seems the utility of throwing is high in a project specific npmrc, and it starts dropping rapidly as you get to the user's npmrc or the other 2 which shall not be named.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this is yet another thing we could add to npm doctor, to start like just saying, hey, like, you know, you've got, you know, this config in your global config. We don't really consider that a global config item anymore, or whatever. Yeah, and I do like your idea, Philip, for you know, if we're going to throw a warning or an error or whatever we decide to do based on an invalid config, it should generally only be for the command you're running at the moment, because it'll make sense, right? Because they may have specified that command in the CLI itself, you know, while they're running it, not necessarily even in a config file, because it's ultimately like about the resulting config, not necessarily just about like what's in a config file. Cool. Well, let's move on to the next item, which is the biggie for today. And that is dependency selector syntax. So this is basically just like CSS selectors, but for dependencies, for packages. So the idea behind this, so if you click on the rendered RFC, the idea behind this is that this is very CSS-like. This will be familiar to people that write CSS DOM selectors, query selectors. Yeah, it could be used for a lot of commands. We could start in the future piping results between commands. I think it has a lot of potential. We see a lot of people piping things through JQ in order to do similar functionality. So it would be good to have this native. Yeah, Jordan.
Yeah. So I wanted to just talk about a light philosophical concern I have. So ESLint added a rule called no restricted syntax, and also, yeah, just in particular, and it supports AST selectors. And so as a result, you can do a lot more powerful things in what syntax you block. That's awesome. That's great, right? There's no complaints about that. However, then people go to ESLint and ask for a better affordance for blocking a specific kind of syntax, something more first class. And I'm glossing over some of the ESLint specific reasons why that's beneficial, but and the maintainer's response is just go use a selector. Bye. And I get why that's the impulse. It's easier maintenance. It's easier on, the core doesn't have to add things, right? But that sucks because there's a whole class of conveniences that are thus boxed out because maintainers can just point the finger over there and pass the buck to the selector syntax.
Yeah.
I can think of tons of amazing use cases for this query stuff, where I would be very saddened and frustrated if the de facto result was that a bunch of RFCs ended up getting shot down because, oh, well, you can just do it with query syntax, because there's a lot of value in having first-class shortcuts to things.
Yes.
And so I would want to make sure that, if possible, that we could that NPM could sort of commit to not using query syntax as a scapegoat for why not to implement a thing in the future. Yeah.
Yep, I like it. Just to give a little bit of insight, some of the things that we've been discussing with this is we can use internally the query logic to implement commands and basically be a lot less like, okay, this command walks the tree, that command walks the tree, this other command it's just like just run the internal query stuff. And so that all that code becomes very consistent.
Yeah.
So I think it becomes something that we can leverage, as you said, for more direct command and config.
And that's amazing as well, because it makes a lot of RFCs much easier to implement.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of, right. And like, I think that's also really great. But then the marginal utility of adding a top level thing decreases objectively. And then like it might become a harder thing to convince being added, because you can point to people, well, let's just put in the documentation and they can run this query command instead of it. But like there is still going to be benefit for adding many things as top level first class commands, even if they're just an alias for a query command. And I want to sort of throw that out there early.
Yeah. I mean, and sort of the fun stuff that I see potential for is like, if there's some vulnerability out there or whatever, people tweet like a JQ command or whatever. And this is like, hey, you can just do this directly. Right. So yeah, no. And yeah, I think it can help us implement RFCs a lot faster too. Owen.
Yeah. Is there maybe the flip side to Jordan's thought there, which I do like, is is there a risk where I guess like, yeah, where do you draw the line? Because isn't there like maybe another case or another multiverse where NPM owns all the commands and you have to start making up your own? And so this is just bypass all that. So I guess, would it make sense? I mean, I know it's hard to predict the future, obviously. But is there a way to kind of define when and why NPM asserts a command namespace, I guess you could say. I mean, the ones that are there now are pretty well established. But, I guess just to leave it open, because I think this happened a while ago with, I know this was more of a Yarn decision, but they claimed one and then it got implemented at NPM and they had to escape hatch it. And obviously, like I said, it's just curious if this does provide more flexibility to the team, because they also don't have to assert every possible command namespace either. So I guess, how do you ring fence that? Getting back to Jordan's point is like, how do you figure out where that line is?
Yeah, I mean, my instinct there is in a place where the functionality is what's needed, not a top level command. Having query there means that it could be implemented as not a top level command, and thus you avoid the debatable downside of a different package manager having an issue with it. But I think that because that is debatable, I think that's sort of going to be a separate ad hoc thing with each potentially conflicting command that comes up, regardless of the existence of query syntax.
Yeah, we could do something similar to like what the GitHub CLI does, and allow and other command, other tools out there, and allowing you to add aliases. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and
there's already been a few RFCs for that, by the way.
Okay.
That were all rejected.
Okay.
Because it would mean that adding any new top level command would be a breaking change forever.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting that's an interesting problem. Oh, and the other thought that I had was, gosh, what was the other thought that I had? Was that it might be nice if we came up with a decision tree that basically said, here's where we would generally want to implement a top level command, and here's where we would generally say, this is an example of a query you can run, right? So maybe we could iterate on that kind of thing. I think we'll be making that decision a number of times, and a decision tree might be more obvious after a while. But that's what these RFC meetings are for too, right? Bringing up, hey, we want to make a new command, is it worth doing? So I think we kind of have process for that already, and we can object and think things through. Anybody else have an initial gut reaction to this? Is this a surprise to anybody, this RFC?
Kind of a thought and a question. I instinctively, I like this proposal.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked previously on Dependabot, and we've ended up doing kind of quite gnarly hacks to do very specific updates to specific packages, for example. And something like this could be very helpful to target exactly the right packages. And then if you can pipe the query into install, we could directly use that on Dependabot. My only kind of concern looking at it is it's very complex, giving this whole query syntax from the get-go. Just skimming the PMPM solution, they just have a filter option, which is maybe too simple. Just kind of throwing it out there as do we want to start with you can do everything, query literally every single field in a packament?
Yeah, maybe there's a phased approach we should take, or maybe that's a documentation issue where we go here's the subset that most of the time this is just the stuff that you're going to need. And then if you're getting fancy, go to this advanced section, right? Use some of the, more, meta syntax kind of stuff, or pseudo classes and stuff rather.
And I had a comment that I'd made, it left on the RFC about I think using class names in the terminology, I think is very confusing. It's borrowing too much from CSS, a term CSS probably should have avoided also. So I think that there's a lot of surface syntax and terminology changes that can be made to improve the education story here and the intuition story that might not make it come off so complicated.
Yeah.
I hope so anyway.
Yep. So I think,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Thought on that, like, I wonder if some of those class names could be improved by having like a type or something. So instead of being like an attribute, so instead of being .prod class name, you could have the attribute might, I mean, something like type, but maybe something more specific, and the value is prod.
Yeah, I think we're going to be iterating on this for a little bit. So it's not like we have to surface all of the problems and all of the concerns today. So I think this has a ton of potential, and I'm super excited about it. So on that note, let's see if we can get one more thing off the agenda.
I was gonna, sorry, I just
Yeah.
raised my hand right before you were about to switch.
Yeah.
I wanted to speak to the complexity of it because I've been looking at it for a while, longer than most other people being on the team. And that was my initial reaction also, is that having it mapped too closely to CSS, there's kind of an uncanny valley there of like, it's never gonna be exactly CSS. So trying to map it one-to-one is going to be impossible, but then trying to map it, 99% is going to be weird to have that like 1% or 5% or whatever percentage difference it ends up being. So I do agree that terminology there is a big part of it. So not having, I think the word classes is a bit strange when it comes to dependency types, but I do think that there is some benefit of having a few like blessed, like, if we don't call them classes, but the thing you're going to want to do 99% of the time is do a .prod, then to still have that be like a more top level thing than an attribute, but not have everything be like, you could still do a type of prod.
Yeah,
if you
to be
wanted,
clear,
if you wanted to.
I don't have any conceptual issue with the thing that classes currently are called, like having a top level category or something and using a dot to access it. Like, I think that we should just avoid the word class and come up with a different term to describe it. And I think everyone will just get that, oh, that's like classes in CSS, but it means this here, and then it'll just be fine. And like, I'm cool with the capability. I just think that the terminology overlap is a big problem.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think that was all I had to say about it, is just, if we can work on that terminology, I think it would help a lot, especially in examples that we're going to write out for this stuff.
Great. Luke, do we normally end this after 30 minutes?
No, we normally go the full hour. Is this all we have?
Okay. No. We can keep going. I just, for some reason, I had seen on the calendar event, it showed me 30 minutes for some reason. Okay, let's keep moving then, unless since we have more time, we could keep talking about this, but otherwise. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is discussion expanding the behavior of before. So Miles wrote about being able to reliably install a bunch of packages as if it were a week ago, right? For, I believe the motivation is, for people that are looking to as a mechanism to avoid supply chain attacks, knowing that, hey, we were in a, everything that's been addressed and noticed and all of that is in a good state for 7 days ago. Let's stick there, or whatever it is, right? So I was wondering if people had a chance to read this and what their thoughts were.
Yeah, so the I have two reactions. One is the use case. I've had a lot of discussions around supply chain security lately, and with various folks in the ecosystem. And I think that making it easy for people to do what I'm going to hopefully politely call the lazy approach of just let's just let someone else find it first, right? Like, I'm gonna just wait a day. If enough people do that, then the problem is erased, or the problem is restored, because nobody catches it until a day later. And it's not really like addressing the problem. It's just kind of hoping. It's kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like everyone's just like not, like everyone's not, I don't know, everyone's littering and hoping somebody else picks it up, kind of thing. However, if there existed some sort of detection and mitigation solution where it would make sense, like that had some sort of SLA that it would make sense to wait for, then I think that at that point only, this use case becomes a good one, because then some people will put the time and effort and money into detection and will create a window of time for everyone else to use that may not have those resources. And then this RFC is how you would use use that window. So I'm sort of questioning the actual, the like unintended consequences of having it right now. And then the second thing is, the before flag currently has the nice property of exactly matching what you can pass into new date in JavaScript, and nothing else. And I think that both that is actually really useful to talk about, to teach about it, and to like understand what it's supposed to accept. But also, temporal is stage 3, a language proposal, which creates like, I don't know, 8 new types and entirely replaces date, and has it, it wouldn't have a nice like relative time phrase way of creating something like a week ago, but like it's probably worth exploring that and seeing if there is an analog to be made to the replacement JavaScript date type, and then using that rather than inventing something brand new, or cargo culting it from existing ecosystem libraries like Moment or and Friends. It's cool, like I can see the utility, but there's like a lot of different syntaxes for this. There's some like obscure syntax with letters like 1D, 3R, that type of thing. That's a thing that temporal actually supports, but like I don't know how it works. And then there's English phrases, but what about other languages? Like, there's, I don't know. It just seems like a really complex natural language space to get into.
Yeah. Owen.
To the first point that Jordan brought up about, I guess, just kind of delaying the potential impact, maybe the kick the can metaphor. One thing I think that's interesting about that thought is, I'd be curious to find out when one of these supply chain attacks happen. I've always speculated, not only me, I'm sure others have also done this, but I often think about who is most susceptible in those situations. People that already have existing projects and are most likely to have a lock file and kind of, some varying degrees of, I don't know, control, or I guess basically contrast that to someone who's going to a package README and just doing npm install because that's what it says, following a guide. Like, basically, it seems like it's most likely going to impact the new users as opposed to anybody that's been using npm for, especially now that you have like automatic lock files and stuff like that. And so, to Jordan's point, none of those have any sort of, typically they don't have anything that says, at that point, you really don't have any way to know at all if you've been compromised, right? You're just running it, and short of them adding this heuristic to all their things, or so I guess the thought is is there a way to, and I don't know if there's something that NPM or GitHub can do when these supply chain attacks happen, is there a way to gauge like where on the spectrum of brand new NPM user running NPM install on React for the very first time ever in their life to, hey, I'm opening a PR at my job and we've got like frozen lock file commands and all that stuff in our CI pipeline, and I guess maybe use that as a tuning rod to figure out, not that I don't think this is helpful, but is it gonna, who's most susceptible in these situations, and does it move the needle for them? Or is there a way to find ways to move the needle for them, in some capacity? Like maybe Jordan's point is like maybe a tooling author could put a piece of metadata in their package JSON that somehow backdates it to like, I don't know, but
it's based on the actual publish time in the registry, so it's not forgeable.
Right. Right. I just didn't know if you could like somehow control it within, I don't know. I think like some of the things that I was reading about, and doesn't have to dovetail into this or what others' opinions are, but if you're familiar with Baras's new project, socket.dev or IO, and some of the mitigation, or I guess some of the heuristics they're using, like, we added all of a sudden a post and an install script was added in a patch release, or, this is the first time from a newly transferred publisher. Like those are the things, especially when you're reading off a README, that should fire all the alarm bells to the most susceptible person that, isn't going to be thinking of something like this, or probably isn't, even familiar with how the ecosystem works enough to protect themselves in that moment. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Owen. Philip?
Yeah, I got a couple of thoughts. From Dependabot, we had this type of feedback quite a lot. People wanted Dependabot to update dependencies that were like delayed by some days. And I think there is like some case for doing it. I think Amazon did some data crunching on, I saw some Twitter thread on this. I haven't actually seen the data, but they, I think, figured out that 7-day delay was like the optimal time where you don't want it to be too delayed, and a lot of things get patched in the next couple of days after being published. But I'm wondering if it's like confusing to also do it on install, because it could be coming from a log file, in which case you get what you have in the log file, and that doesn't make any difference, right?
No, install will update the log file. CI will use the log file.
Right. So if you did before, you'd actually update the log file to match that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Should it be called something like published before, to make it clear?
Original title is enjoy by. I believe before is the
best
most recent name.
Yeah. So I there's a little bit of a theme here in this discussion, in that we need to understand the messaging behind of this kind of option, and really help be considerate of like best practices, right? And understanding like which kinds of users should do which, what is GitHub and NPM as a repository guaranteeing, or what is their SLA, and all of that. And of course, all of that's evolving. So I think all of that messaging has to come together. I will say that as far as technically implementing the command, it does give us a place to move forward, in that we can play with defaults in the future. We can once, we can say, this is what we recommend, or in this case or that case. So yeah, I think there's some, it's kind of nice to have it as an option, but it could get away from us, right? If the community decides like this is the best practice, right?
Well, and you can already do it. It's just that on Windows, it's particularly painful, right? Like it's really it's trivial on a non-Windows system to like interpolate a date command in the output. And I think that's in the RFC, right?
Yeah.
And so like, I think there's something to be said for it. It's just kind of, there's a lot of underappreciated unintended consequences of making something easier. And in general, if you're making something easier and it's not actually helping, let's say security, but it makes people think it is, then that's actually harmful. And replace security with anything. If people think it's helping a thing and it's not actually helping that thing, it's worse than not having that convenience at all, because
Yeah.
people then get lulled into a false sense of security about whatever the thing is they're trying to help.
Mm-hmm. Luke?
Yeah, I had a few thoughts. One is it's spelled out in the RFC, but being able to put this in an npm RC file, I think, is the biggest pro for me for standardizing this syntax, whatever it ends up as. Because yeah, you can do it as a date in the command line, but if a project did want to do this, we should make that possible where it isn't right now, like without custom scripting. And then on the topic of messaging, I have a lot of thoughts. It makes me think of a little bit of when npm, the original message for the package lock was you should commit this file, which is, I think was shown by default to everyone in 6 or 5, which is, it's that type of message that's true, but if you don't, if it's not true for you, then it's not. And so I think coming up with a messaging for this is a similar thing of not like saying everybody should, uninstall, you should set before relative to 7 days, but to have more nuance than that. And that, I think that probably lives in the docs or some sort of, or the help page for the command. But then also the ability for this to do unintended things and have users who run npm install and are wondering why they're not getting the package they just published, or that someone told them on Twitter, go down, patch has been released, go install it. Right. And this came up the other day in an issue I was triaging for the tag flag, which was not installing what they thought it would. And so again, things silently failing or not doing what you expect, I think is a theme where we could have some sort of logs or messaging to say, maybe behind the verbose log level or something to say like fetching Pacument found this date, but decided to install this version based on date flag. So just something like that to further make it clear what is actually happening, so we don't get issues about it of people wondering why something is not installed.
Good point. Thanks, Luke. Philip?
Yeah, I just had another thought. So I found the tweet from someone working at Amazon who were like, they basically did a bunch of data crunching and found that 7-day delay was the optimal for them. I think if we introduced command like this, maybe a better user experience would be having just a single delay that's based on analyzing all vulnerability data for npm.
Well, this is sort of what I'm talking about with unintended consequences, right? Like I believe that 7 days was an optimal time for them, right? But why was that an optimal time? And the reason is because nobody else is waiting and the rest of the ecosystem's doing it. And so if Amazon waits 7 days, then they profit off of the backs of everyone else being vulnerable to this thing and doing it. If we make it easy to do this, people will cargo cult that as a best practice. And if enough people do it, then we've just undone all of the benefit for it because people aren't catching it. And if there is a concerted effort to catch it in a certain amount of time, that sounds like the sort of thing that npm would be, perhaps want to offer as a service, maybe even a paid service. And then once that exists with an SLA, that immediately becomes the best practice. Everyone should wait because this service is going to find it, something like that.
Great.
Like it just feels like one of those, that thing about how if you A/B test too much, you find the local maximum, but not like the actual maximum somewhere else. And I think this is like that sort of category where crunching the numbers isn't going to give you the best result. It's just going to give you the best result when nothing else changes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think all this is great. We can add this back into the discussion. Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is, which is an issue in the CLI. Cannot work on FAT32 USB drive. Luke or Roy, do you have any insight on this? Has to do with
Sorry,
symlinks.
I was muted. I do have a little bit in that I was triaging it, but I don't know the original, if there was anything behind it besides, yeah, it's just in the CLI with the agenda label. So I think it came up as a feature request that should go through here because, sorry, I'm reading it again to get the full context. It's with it not, so npm installed by default creates symlinks to binary. So it would be a flag that would not do that, so that it could work on FAT32 drives. So I don't have any more context than that, but it seems like a relatively small feature as long as it's not the default that someone could opt into to use shims instead of symlinks.
What about more auto-detected features? Is like if the directory is mounted as FAT32, then use this other behavior. Rather than making it a config.
I think, yeah, I'm concerned about detecting things and interpreting user behavior that we've run, or intent. I mean, obviously, if you're installing as this user is a React Native project on a USB drive, I think that would signal intent, but I would be concerned about it going too far. And I don't know the specific functionality around detecting that in USB drives.
Yeah, I don't either. And I can see it being a slippery slope too. And it's like, well, then we have to make all these special cases for these other file systems and this file system and yada, yada, yada. So leaving it up to the user makes sense to me too.
Seems like it could follow that convention for like how you describe like native binaries to install, like the package author lists out their supported environment. So you could align it with that, like, you tell us what your environment is or something like that.
Yeah, I think
Plus
in this case, you're just explicitly saying, this is how I want you to behave for npm install, right? So it's less of an environmental thing. It's more of this is the behavior I want right now.
Contextual. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, how you know how many people this would impact, but if, I don't know if it's ever come up before, but you've made it pretty far without it. So needing to be baked into the system.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
The interesting thing about this one is it looks like this user has found an environment variable that we're using for testing, which makes it behave as they want. So that leads me to believe it's at least a situation we test for. And so I think if it is, that makes me lean a little bit more in the direction of we can add a flag for it. I think in other cases, I'd be concerned with adding options that would lead to more options, which would lead to more options, instead of just saying we don't support we don't explicitly support installing on a USB drive and maybe giving a helpful warning. But in this case, I do see this as something we could at least move forward on and attempt to implement and open a pull request for and see if it works. I think testing is another issue. I don't know exactly how we would test this, but that's implementation detail.
Yep.
You spin up a Raspberry Pi and Amazon.
Yeah. GitHub Action,
Yeah.
Raspberry Pi platform. When's that coming?
Are USB drives all FAT32 still, or is
No.
yeah? So it has to be like a really old USB drive or thumb
Necessarily.
drive or
I
something.
mean, there's a big fat format. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's essentially FAT32. It's still pretty common.
Okay.
But it's not just because of interoperability between OSs. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to the next item, which is the last item on our agenda is improve signature verification. And we have Philip here himself. So if you want to introduce this one.
Yes, so I think it can be helpful to see this as basically fixing existing registry signatures by doing two things. One is migrating from PGP to a EC DSA signature. So the signature it's much more compact and can be verified using the Node's crypto library. Whereas with the existing PGP signature, you need to install Open PGP to verify. The other is basically making it easy to verify these registry signatures. Currently, you can write a script that does it using, so the registry signs packages and publish, and they get added to the document. But if you want to verify that signature, you need to write some custom code to, one, get the public key from Keybase and install OpenPGP and do that verification dance. And that kind of works for a single package version, but it becomes quite gnarly if you want to verify like every single installed package in your. The query syntax will make that easier, I guess, but before we get there. So this command is just adding a way to verify everything that's in your install, check that against the public key, npm's public key.
So
Okay.
my main question, I think I had a bunch on there, but my main one now is why not just do this automatically by default on npm install? Like, who wouldn't want this, assuming that the lack of a signature from the registry didn't cause anything to fail?
I think we could do that. My only concern was like, do we want to just go with that from D1 without really testing the performance impact? And there is a kind of gnarly thing to figure out with third-party registry support. So the RFC has some plan on how we can support third-party registries, like if they use the same URL scheme for accessing the public keys. But should the CLI just trust those keys by default? And then if we don't, you might need to add some kind of prompt SSH style where you ask users to trust the keys.
Well, so, I mean, these are all good questions. And the reason why we would probably want a command first and then to put it in install, but they have to be resolved either way. Yeah. Right. Like, but in other words, it seems to me like the end goal would be, if the registry provides you with a signature, there's never a reason not to validate it. And if they give you a signature and it's invalid, no one wants to proceed. Fail the operation, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By default, if the registry doesn't provide a signature that npm can understand, it should just accept it. but then maybe somebody wants to be more paranoid and failed in that case, and they should be able to opt into that. But like, that shouldn't be the default for lots of reasons, but also because of third-party registries and those concerns. So my sort of expectation is that if we went with that model, where by default, a signature it understands can kill the install if it fails, and a signature it doesn't understand is just pass through. Then third-party registries just wouldn't have, like, they wouldn't have to support this. It would just continue to work as it's doing. And when we added some way for them to support it, they would just, you know, assuming we did, like, we'd have to design for it initially, but like when a particular registry started supporting it, it would just magically get this verification behavior. Like, it just, I don't know. I'm not seeing any reason to make this opt-in, given that I think that the attack vector it's protecting against is highly unlikely, but I also think that the information's there, and if that ever were exploited, like, everyone would want this to be allowed. And I think that if it were ever exploited and NPM didn't do this by default, but could have chosen to, I think a lot of people would be very angry and saying, well, why, like, you know, it reminds me of that Seinfeld scene where Jerry bought a huge, expensive, like, deadbolt for his apartment door, and it has only one weakness: you have to lock it. Right? It sort of reminds me of that. It's just that, like, you know, anyway, I've talked enough.
But does it make sense to start with a separate command to actually test this out, and then with the goal to add it by default on install? And I updated the RFC to nest the command under audit, because that came up quite a few times, as there are other commands being added to audit.
Yeah, that seems like a good place to put it.
Luke?
I saw a question from Nathan also about using well-known URLs.
Oh, that's kind of a side comment in general.
Okay, cool. Should we go into that now? Or Luke, you had your hand up too.
Oh, yeah, I just had a few general thoughts. I do agree that if this seems like a really good feature to add by default, I'm always concerned with false positives, or just even if they're, you know, at NPM scale, false positives, they can garner enough distaste, or, you know, in the case of audit, where people would just advocate for turning them off entirely. So that would be something I'd want to be, you know, be more sure of. And I haven't never implemented this, so you know, I don't have any specific concerns. I'm kind of curious if we could run like large package installs on large package trees, and just as a test beforehand to see how it performs and how it works. I would be interested in those numbers, but overall, I think this is a super positive change, and one that if anything ever did attack this, we definitely want this in place. So I'm a big +1.
Yeah, I think that's a really, you barely touched on it, but that was the big question mark in my head, was like performance. How does this affect you know, install performance? So
yeah, we have some open issues around that anyways with NPM 8, so I don't see that being we're doing something with hashing and integrity already. I just don't think it's being verified against a public key, so I don't know technically what that adds, but I think we're already doing enough work in this case that if we dove into this implementation, we could do it without a large net increase in install time, is what is my gut feeling about this.
Yeah, I think the only like really added thing that would happen on install would be, we already download the document that has all the information we need, and we just need to call the Node crypto library to actually do the signature verification, give it the public key. And I think that stuff is pretty quick, and maybe it could even be done concurrently.
cool. Well, I think that's us pretty much at time, unless there's some further comments on this signature verification RFC.
What are the usual next steps for an RFC?
Well, we decide whether it's in in a final state, and then we put it on the roadmap. So yeah, that's a discussion we can have.
Nice one.
All right, let me look up something real quick. Let's see. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. Philip, was this your first time?
Yes.
Well, thanks for coming. Feel free to stop by in the future, even if you don't have something on the agenda. So this is open to the public. Welcome for everybody. Yeah, I'm gonna end the recording here. So thanks everyone who participated.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, everyone.